thanks to all of you. I have one question for each of you, and then I want to get as quickly as we can to hear what the group wants to know. So, Amanda, starting with you, I loved what you said about optimizing for participation. And one question that I have for you is around the Texas Tribune Festival and journalists' role. Like, I'm really curious about what does it look like to take these reporters who, in your online comments are very much interacting with your members. What does that look like in real life?
A couple things, actually, and maybe this is by virtue of the fact that I came to membership after doing a lot of work, well, primarily in journalism and reporting, and then focusing on audience, and now focusing on membership. When we think about getting the journalists involved and engaging our audience, we're not saying, please engage with these people because they are our members. In fact, that's not at all how we think about it. We think about our journalists engaging with readers authentically about the news. And so what that looks like is either, from stage, moderating and engaging with people on an issue, that we're discussing at an event. Now we just actually, I'm looking for my coral peeps, but we just launched talk comments on our site, and so increasingly that will involve discussing, stories and responding to questions in the comments. It could be doing AMAs in our Facebook group. So there are a number of ways that we already encourage our journalists to interact with readers. And again, for us, it's not interact with them because they're a member. It's interact with them because it's a way to build a relationship with folks and expand your journalism by cultivating sources even and leveraging the expertise of our audience. And then by virtue of those positive interactions, we think people are going to be more likely to support us financially.
Thank you. On that idea of relationships, Tim, you showed us sort of this excellent and I think somewhat shocking chart of sort of the big divide between sort of new and returning supporters and how great that gap can become if you're not paying attention to the latter. Can you just talk to us about sort of good practices that you've seen for keeping a team focused on what would uninterestingly be called reducing churn, or to put it a better way, keeping your existing people around and giving them work worth paying for?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of lessons to be learned there from public media, something they do very well. By the way, we're in the midst of a KUT membership drive.
Wow, very good. Give money.
Now would be a good time. So the concept of stewardship is really important, whether, again, subscriptions, membership, whatever, in terms of genuinely thanking your supporters, encouraging them to be part of the community, so beyond financial contribution. From a data perspective, paying very close attention to people who look like they're starting to slip in their engagement, what we would call churn modeling, which is re-engaging people before you lose them. Billing practices, which is really not sexy, but I'm happy to talk about, which is making sure that when people's credit cards fail, you actually have a process for recapturing those folks. Those are a few of them. The biggest thing is exactly what Amanda just said, which is having the newsroom be in the driver's seat of subscriber or member retention, outreach, paying attention to audience needs, that sort of thing.
Right. And again, because it's good practice, not just because you're then tying that to subscription or donation. Jason, you mentioned ways that you've involved readers at the Globe, and I think the example that you showed looked sort of like a call out, like bring us what you know. What has worked well there, and what are any lessons that you might have learned in the process of going to people and sort of being very direct in explaining what it is that you're asking for?
Yeah, so we've done that a lot, and we've used a number of tactics in terms of cultivating reader voice, whether it's asking them for tips on a subject they may be knowledgeable about, or fostering public discussion on one of our platforms. Success, each opportunity that you do it, success is going to look a little different, but, I think success is when you actually get people engaged, and it feels like you're not just talking about the story you wrote, but you're able to take it offline from that and actually foster discussion about a topic or issue.
I hope also you're the one who came up with the name The Daily Rip.
It's not me.
Newsletter?
It's Matt Carolian, the GM of the marijuana section, so Credit where it's due.
Tony, you raised something that we think a lot about at the Membership Puzzle Project, which is sort of how underserved communities might be involved, so that when we talk about subscription and membership, we're not just eventually talking about sort of paid products that become quite elite. I'm curious about other projects that you've seen that are doing that well. Sort of where do you see bright spots when it comes to bringing that other 98% of people along?
Dude, I have no idea. For me, I'm by far not the smartest person in this room on this thing. The thing that I've been focused on more than anything has been like, how do you get the underlying economics right to make that possible for people to participate, people who care about news and communities. So I think like we can do a tremendous amount of stuff where we do outreach and so forth, but if we haven't got fundamental systemic economics right, then it'll always be an effort, and we want to make it effortless. So I've been so heads down on my own brand of crazy that I am not remotely able to answer that question. I'm sorry.
Not to worry. Suggestions welcome. What do you want to know from this group? See a hand actually rose in the hall, just right.
One here.
Oh, I'm Daniela from Texas State University, and I was just wondering if I'm a student a journalism student, and I've noticed that a majority of us did not have to take culturally relevant courses. So it's all about learning how to write, but in the diversity of the country is changing and the makeup of the population is changing. And because we don't have to take those kind of classes, one really doesn't know how to take the best approach when writing about communities that they don't belong in. So do you believe that if we make students take courses or introduce more courses that represent who we are as a population, it could also better the kind of writing and the kind of topics, and we write more towards the groups that we're trying to target?
Can you throw it?
Yes.
This is an excellent question. Do any of you have?
Yes.
I would add the coursework, I think, is a vital part. That your work will only be as interesting as sort of the areas where you're able to go deep. But then I also think about where you spend your time outside of the classroom. And we've been really encouraged by more engaged journalism projects that are all about showing up and meeting with people regularly, even when you're not on assignment. So where are the places where you can almost embed yourself and be an active listener and ask thought-provoking questions, so that then when it comes time to for your reporting, you're reporting with, not just on.
My name is João Gabriel. I'm from ISPER University and Estadão newspaper in Brazil. I work for a newspaper that's focused on political issues. When you work for a newspaper focused on political issues, the newspaper have to make a choice to be partisan or non-partisan. And the non-partisan is the model of Economist and New York Times. Partisan is the model of Fox News, for example. The problem is, at least in my country, partisan newspapers and vehicles had much more engagement than non-partisan newspapers. How to make good engagement of the readers and membership and all these things in a non-partisan newspaper?
I mean, the Texas Tribune is proudly non-partisan. You can go to our donor wall and see everyone who has given, and you'll see that there are people on both sides of the aisle, and we pride ourselves on that. I think it's possible. It's just a different value proposition, and I think that I don't believe that Fox News has a membership program, but I would imagine that the reasons that people engage with those sort of brands that reinforce an ideology, people are looking for something entirely different than they are looking for what we provide, which is credible, nonpartisan, fact-based journalism. So far, we see that, people are interested in and value what we do and are willing to support it. So I think that there's promise in that for other nonpartisan news organizations, for sure.
I would just second that, too. I think in a marketplace that is saturated with opinions everywhere, having nonpartisan, strong political coverage is something readers really appreciate and are willing to pay for.
Yep.
Amanda, it looked like...
My name is...
Oh, my name is Aaron Pilhover.
Oh, hi. I know you.
How are you? It looked like at the beginning of the membership chart, there was sort of a retention problem, possibly. It looked like it was a little bit of a fever chart, and then things have been going up. Can you talk a little bit about the retention efforts you've been making with existing members?
I can tell you about it more recently. That chart was not a retention chart. That was just a growth in households, but sure. Very inconsistent. And the spike was actually, if any of you know, well, maybe you were there, you can talk about the Wendy Davis moment, but the Texas Tribune live streaming the Wendy Davis filibuster is what that big spike was. And so if you take that out, perhaps it's more gradual, but still it has been interesting to try to build a strategy off of so much variance. I will tell you that for us, retention I think was about 50% last year and dropped a bit it was 50% 2017 and dropped a bit in 2018. But it's something that we're focused on. It's partly a technology issue and making sure, as Tim was suggesting, that you are catching people before they lapse if it's a credit card issue, that you know when those renewals are coming, how you're speaking to people and segmenting them based on the donation level, and all kinds of advanced, very granular segmentation stuff. But the trade-off has been the growth that we've seen, most recently last year. We more than doubled the number of new members that we got last year. And that's because we moved from primarily fundraising around 2 tentpole campaigns, the drives, and through our spring drive and our fall drive, I think we see that we're converting more of our already engaged audience. And the more opportunistic that we've been, doing crowdfunding, for instance, around the immigration crisis at the border, crowdfunding around our voter rolls coverage, and just really being a little bit more nimble on the news, we're finding that we're getting newer members, people from within Texas. Our core, our membership is, made up mostly of Texans, but on those news-driven campaigns, we're getting people from outside of Texas, too, that simply value the journalism. And so as we start to see that, we're learning, okay, what does that mean for our retention efforts overall? We have to keep an eye on this and understand the difference between someone who's giving just because they're invested in that one single story, which may die and be completely irrelevant to the Texas Tribune in terms of politics or policy in 2 years, and the people who are going to be in it with us for the long haul. We don't want to turn away money from the people who are interested in the sort of short-term stories, but we do have to kind of factor for that strategically.
So also, really quickly, one very small tactical thing, which you'll appreciate as a UX guy. So early days, the landing page for membership at the Texas Tribune, the default was annual and $60 a year. And I think you showed the membership landing page now, or a version of it. When we switched to the default being monthly and the default being $9 a month, we went from 90% of people, 95% of, I can't remember the number, 95% of people on annual subscriptions, non-recurring annual subscriptions, to 90+% of people being on recurring monthly subscriptions. Well, guess what happens to retention when you do that? It goes way up. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Melissa Hellman. I'm a reporter at Seattle Times. And beforehand, I was at a weekly that closed down because we didn't have a subscription model. And I covered a lot of investigations that if I were just going off of the comments section alone, we wouldn't have gotten any subscribers. So I'm curious how much you use your readers' opinions to determine what you cover in your publications.
I mean, it's a factor, but it is not like we troll our comment section looking for story ideas. I think it works best when we're helping drive and facilitate the discussion about something that very clearly matters throughout the community. And you can gauge that by what the reader responses are and the level of interest.
I would say my thought on your great question is just like with any data analytics, it's one form of input, right? So you're also thinking about, is there canceller research that you can bring in from people who used to pay for your work and stopped doing it? That's another really valuable input that I think is often underutilized. For people who are brand new to your work, really thinking about all of these various inputs as sort of channels to be paying attention to, but not that you let that dictate the coverage.
One other thing I would just say is I'm way less interested in reader opinions and much more interested in readers' questions. What do they want to know, and what do they know by virtue of their expertise? And we've had a lot of success in doing great journalism based on reader questions or reader tips. So.
Okay. Katie Camp, Cox Media Group, Orlando. We are primarily a broadcast company. I keep saying that to the panels because I think I might be the only person in here from TV. But so, yeah, Tony, you spoke at our conference a few years ago in Orlando. My question is about OTT. Everybody has gotten into the video game. Facebook is trying to be its own competitor with YouTube. And as we go forward towards OTT, a lot of our apps are still free. Do you guys think, in your opinions, like especially with the Globe going to a subscription base, is this bad for broadcast, or should we just institute like a $6.99 fee a month, the way Disney announced they're doing yesterday?
I can't answer that. I think every readership is different, and the key for you is figuring out who your readers are. They want to pay. The models I outlined were very globe specific. I wouldn't necessarily advocate for someone else incorporating like New England visits as one of their key metrics. I think the underlying reasoning behind that is that you really need to dig into your readership, learn who's reading you, who's watching your videos, and find out what the best model is to build around that.
Yeah, it's kind of an economic equation in the end, which is like, what is the loss in advertising revenue that you'll see from putting up some kind of barrier to viewership versus what will you raise on this, and what is the relative ARPUs on this kind of thing? So if you're making more money by closing it off than you are from like keeping it open, then you kind of do it. Especially when you try to project that out over the next 10 years. Trend lines are great,
We'll have that be the last question. I also just want to thank Mallory, who has been such an amazing asset in bringing us all together.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, Mallory. Thank you so much. I think it was great, a great panel.